and welcome to Beyond the Venue podcast with your host, MG, the venue specialist. I am joined today by my friend Christine Fisher. Her and I used to know each other. I guess we first met about, give or take, like 10 years ago while I was in grad school studying, getting that master's in tourism and hospitality management, which ended up kind of being a master's in the craft beer industry, which is how we met. I was doing an internship with a local brewery, and I can't remember where you were at the time, Christine. What were you up to in those days?
I think if we met in like 2010 or 11, I was working at Yards, which is the first time I remember meeting you. I distinctly remember being in the tasting room on Delaware Ave and meeting you, and I was a tour guide there on like weekends and would hang out. And then I worked either at Local 44 and Craft Work at the time, or maybe just like one of them. It depends on when we met.
Okay, fair enough. And for our listeners, if you're not familiar, Yards is a huge local brewery here in Philadelphia. And then Lucky.
You love Lucky 13.
Lucky 13 is another bar. Remember bars? Local 44 out in West Philadelphia, and then Craftwork, their sister location that's in Fishtown. So
they're not related.
They're not related. Oh, that's right. Okay. No, they were never related. This is how long it's been since even I'm rusty. Wow.
Yeah, you're probably in a Memphis tap room in that neck of the woods.
You know what? Even Sidecar used to be their sister restaurant. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sometimes we get the parent companies wrong. This happens. So
it's all changed since then anyway.
Which segues right into everything has changed, not just the world, but when I first discovered a couple of years ago that I was gluten intolerant, this former beer rep that could no longer drink beer, I remember telling it to someone who used to be in the industry with us, and they're like, "Oh, you and Christine should start a podcast." And I laugh because I'm like, "That's right. You experienced all of these allergies while you were working in beer as well." And so that's kind of what brought us here today to talk about our insane dietary restrictions. And so hence the title, Hold My Beer, because we can no longer, former beer reps who can no longer drink beer. We're also going to touch on a lot of kind of the issues that go along with that, because it's not just physical, but there are self-care issues involved. There's mental health. And so we're just kind of going to touch on all of that. And I want to hear a little bit more about your experience when you learned you had food allergies. Because I just remember I don't know what's wrong. Something is wrong. I'm help. What was your experience? Yeah. Tell our listeners, like, what were you going through, and kind of what was the ultimate resolve of the allergies?
Yeah. Well, speaking of not being able to drink beer, cheers. Thanks
cheers.
For being on your podcast. Nice mug. Yeah, it was pretty nuts. I grew up having a lot of stomach issues and being like a very kind of put a lot of pressure on myself, firstborn child, kind of like overachiever type. It was always just written off as nerves. Like, she's nervous. She has nerves with cold, this and that. So I had a lot of trouble with digestion, and then it got worse in college. And I also knew that there were certain foods I couldn't eat because they made my mouth itchy. And it was always written off as what's called oral allergy syndrome, which is if you cook the food, it breaks down the proteins, denatures the protein, and you can eat it. So I would make peach pie, even though I can't eat a raw peach. There were certain foods I could eat. And then there were other ones I knew that I could technically eat cashews, but I will pay for it later. But it never really escalated to oh, I can't breathe or this or that. So they thought it wasn't food allergies. And I just kind of avoided those foods. I never underwent food allergy testing. And I just avoided them. So as it turned out, avoiding those foods is probably what kept it from ever becoming an anaphylactic reaction. I never really built up a bad reaction. So I actually probably grew up with some food allergies and or developed them as a teen. And then in my 20s, nothing really changed. I was still I thought I had oral allergy syndrome. I knew what foods I could tolerate cooked, which ones I couldn't. And then I had like a really bad like antibiotic resistance issue with an infection, and then I had to get like a 2 mega doses of antibiotics. And current research is now showing that it's very likely that after sometimes with adults like heavy antibiotic usage, your digestive system, like your immune response, like your microbiome is thrown off, and you're more susceptible to develop food allergies, especially if you already have them.
Mm.
And so, of course, I was in the hospitality industry. It's 2010, or when this happened, I guess 11 or 12. I didn't have health insurance. I had to go to a clinic. I got pretty bad frontline care for this issue. It came back and it kept getting worse, and they just like threw the book at it. So, because of being in that like disadvantage, I ended up being put in this situation. And so, like, I kind of was getting like gradually like a little bit off. Sometimes it'd be like, oh, I'd throw up after having like 2 beers or something, where you don't expect like I can handle 2 beers. Like I work in the beer industry, you know.
Right.
And so I got the beer rep job the year I turned 30, and I was so excited. It was like I got my dream job. I turned 30. Like things are turning around. This is gonna be awesome. And pretty soon after that, especially from like drinking beer more often, I started getting sick. And it starts out small at first. It was like sometimes it felt like, oh, I have to kind of like feel like I have to pee all the time, or like my skin is breaking out in these weird like things that don't look like hives because they're flat, but they burn like hell. Like even now you can see it sometimes. Like I'll use something I'm not allergic to, but my skin can be so sensitive that it kind of like reacts for a little bit. My hair started falling out. I was throwing up a lot more often than like you would. Okay, I was just throwing up. Period. Like I was having, I was throwing up a lot and was like, this is weird. I would get dizzy. I would wake up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Trying to think, yeah, it was pretty much like every part of my body I was having issues, and my anxiety was weird. Like I would get like racing thoughts, my heart would be racing,
Well,
and
if all that stuff is happening to your body, I can't even imagine. No wonder you'd be completely filled with anxiety for sure.
yeah, it was really strange. And I think like stubbornly, along the way, it was like, hey, you should get checked out for food allergies, and I was always like, no, 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 like I'll see a dermatologist, I'll see a stomach doctor, I'll see whatever, I'll see like these specialists who are all kind of like, well, I don't see any obvious reason for like what's going on. So finally, like of all things, I went to my gynecologist complaining. I was felt like I was having like weird issues, and she was like, "You're completely fine, but if you're having these like full body reactions, have you thought about food allergy testing?"
No, no one's ever suggested that before.
So sure enough, it took seeing like every specialist ever until finally one was like, you're going for food allergy testing." So I went in for that. I got set up with an allergist, and that takes like 5 months. So I get on the books with an allergist, and like 5 freaking months later, you actually get an appointment and go in. It all came to a head. Like it started, like I was spiraling. I was really sick, mentally, physically. And then it came to a head. I lost my job. And a week later, I think like to the day, I went into the doctor's office. I had found out through the blood work results that I was allergic to beer. I couldn't even do skin testing because I was so sick that skin testing could have put me in the hospital if they were worried.
Wow.
Yeah. To this day, I've never been able to go off of Zyrtec for 5 days long enough to take skin tests to like check. Yeah,
Wow.
because they're more accurate, but I can't get them done. So long story short, I finally got to like, even when I got the results in my inbox that were like positive for barley, positive for hops, I was like, nah, like that's a false positive. Like,
Do the
no,
test
like,
over. I'll wait another 5 months.
no.
No
Yeah.
problem.
Every Google thing I could find about like blood tests being less reliable, I was like, it's fake, it's fake, it's fake. So I go into the doctor's appointment, and she also pulled up like my whole blood panel, and she was like, Christine, I don't know how you walked into the doctor's office today. Like you should be in the
Wow.
hospital. We don't even have a measurement for how bad your IgE, which is like the amount of like your immune response to it. She's like, we it's off, like it isn't measured. Like high is like above 110, and you are maybe somewhere around like 4,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that was it.
geez.
And then my life changed, and I was in
Was
deep
it just the
denial for a
immediately like
while.
if like once you cut it out, like once you stopped drinking beer and then like consuming everything that they was it like an immediate fix at least for the physical symptoms?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes and no. So I was also told explicitly I had an allergy to nuts, which I'd always thought like I kind of didn't.
And
And I
every
ate a
single
ton of
nut,
them.
not even like a specific one?
Most nuts, like some of them are in like families, but I react to all of them. I'm technically allergic to peanuts, but because I eat them like all the time, as long as I keep eating them every day, I stay sensitized. So I avoid them when I'm like traveling, like things like I'm going to be on an airplane. Like I don't get peanuts just in case. Like you're not near a hospital, you're in the air. But like
Remember
other than that,
traveling?
yeah. Like, or if I have like an important test or something, right? Like I'll like some important deadline or something, I'll avoid like peanuts, but just in case. But I've been sensitized to them. I also found out I was allergic to soy, sesame. Um, I think, oh, and most fruit, like most fruit. I'm allergic to most fruit. As I thought I had OAS, I'm actually like anaphylactic or like
What is OAS?
Oh, the oral allergy syndrome, which like some
Oh,
people will
yes.
get
Okay, that
where,
you alluded to
yeah,
earlier. Yes. Okay.
it never triggers anaphylaxis if it's OAS, apparently, but I don't have that. So I cut out all those foods, or so I thought. So there was like, at first there was like like,
I thought I covered it, but
yeah,
then we
yeah.
did we get version 2.0 of did you eat something that set off another spiral?
So I cut all those things out and I started feeling better. But then within like 2 months, I didn't feel as much better anymore. And I found out that all purpose flour has barley in it. And like a ton of bread
Uh,
products just have barley in their blend. It's a particularly American thing for some reason. I don't know why, but yeah, we put barley into like most of our bread products. So I started getting sick again and I couldn't figure out what it was. And then it turned out like, oh, a ton of like bread products you're used to eating are actually also poisonous.
well, that was something that I was surprised because I guess I it's always difficult to keep up with all of your friends' specific, allergies and dietary restrictions because I know that my group of girlfriends that a lot of us have varying degrees of different things that we can and can't eat. And so with me, it was okay. Once I started working at DeBruno Brothers, which for our listeners, it's a fantastic cheese and Italian specialty shop here in Philly and beyond. Congratulations to you guys with your brand new store on the main line. But starting to work for them, and I'm eating a ton of cheese, and I was like, okay, I'm dying. What's happening? And so I go to the doctor, and they say, stop consuming dairy for 3 weeks. And I'm like, no, there's no way. There is no way. Absolutely not. And I did it. And I'm like, damn it. Oh, well, so then you learn, okay, what is aged and what is soft, and mozzarella is going to destroy me, but Parmesan, we are aces. So just kind of navigating that field and still, playing with fire. Because I think another thing I learned, it's, instead of being allergic to something, it's like, okay, how much can your body tolerate? And with lactose, it seems like it is almost like a well, that if you avoid all dairy for a while, that the well depletes and like you can have a little bit of lactose and you should theoretically be fine. But when you're just, oh, okay, now I am spending 20 to 40 hours a week in a cheese shop, things are not going so well. And it was a year later that I'm like, something is still wrong. So I went to go get the allergy test, and it was awful, but when you're getting stabbed with all of these needles, but at the same time, they're like, you have no food allergies. So it's frustrating when you have no idea like what the answers are. And so the, doctors, I think the allergist prefaced this with, doctors typically will not tell you to go home and Google something, but he did say, go home and Google FODMAPs. And so that was totally life-changing for me, because that's when I learned that, these FODMAPs are specific carbohydrates that when you eat them just causes severe, intense stomach cramping and like a whole slew of other issues. So once I learned that, gluten is high on this list, lactose is high on this list, every single fruit, and there are just so many different, garlic and onions are at the top of the list. And I realized like, oh, I cook with all of these things and I love all these things, and now I have to cut them all out of my diet. Like, this sucks. But once I stopped eating them, I did start to feel a lot better. And so I remember when we talked recently that, you can still have gluten as long as it doesn't have barley or soy in it. And so gluten-free doesn't necessarily help you. And so I think that that's been a struggle for both of us in this past year of we want to support our hospitality industry, but I'm buying as many to go cocktails and bottles of wine that I can, but we'll still order out, but it's playing with fire every time and so for me, I'll have a completely different reaction than if you. So how have you been navigating this past year with takeout, or have you just been cooking for the last 370 days?
I am so tired of cooking. I can just get that out of the gate right now. No, oh my god. Also, you just reminded me, I'm also lactose intolerant, like on top of my allergy. And that was like the same process. Like I wasn't lactose intolerant when I was younger. We drank tons of milk at the house, 2%, always like, fat and everything. And then I started working at like a cafe as a barista and drinking like lattes all the time. It was kind of like, these aren't sitting well. And then I get through college and like progressively my stomach's getting more and more off. And for years, my mom was kind of like, "What if you're lactose intolerant?" And I was like, I refuse to believe that, and I'm just gonna like live in misery." And then I finally like it got to the point where it was like I would eat a cheese sandwich. Oh, I was also a vegetarian, so I ate cheese like 800 times a day, or dairy like 800 times a day. So I got to the point where I was like directly would eat cheese or whatever and get sick, and it was like okay. So then I started buying the pills, and lucky for me, it's not a FODMAPs issue at all. It's like completely just like a lactose intolerance issue. So I take those little pills, but if I am out traveling and I forgot to buy them, like that's another thing not on the menu, because if it has a good amount of lactose in it, for me it's like the opposite. It's funny with my allergies, that well analogy is perfect. I use that all the time actually. I explain it as like a bucket. Like an allergy, like different things can fill like the IgE response bucket, the immune response. Like it could be like a bad seasonal allergy day. So I'm already like, oh shit, that bucket's kind of full already. And now I'm going to add in like, well, I ate something I'm mildly allergic to, but that ended up being the thing that set me off. Whereas on a normal day in the middle of winter, it might not have set me off. And also like, any mild allergy one day can be severe. And so I am obviously like overly cautious. Whereas like if I eat something I'm really allergic to, but like you said, I haven't had it in 10 years, I probably won't actually have a bad reaction. But if I were to like keep eating it, I would. Yeah.
And it's rolling the dice every time because it's the same thing. I sometimes I'll eat things I'm not supposed to and I'm fine, and sometimes I'll have like just a teeny tiny bit and I'm not fine.
Yeah.
And it's but I think a lot of this, I mean, for me, and I'm sure this probably happened to you as well, that this was also coming at a very transitional time in my life where I was forced to really confront a lot of issues that I was going through. And around the time of the FODMAP realization, finally started seeing a therapist. And I always try and bring it up in appropriate spaces because Medicare for all and include a therapist for everybody, because I wholeheartedly believe it's, a lot of us are in therapy because of the people that won't go.
Oh, big time. That's perfect.
So I would just kind of love to give you the floor to talk about your own experiences and kind of anything that you want to highlight and share with the listeners for your journey, and any tips that have maybe worked for you, or just kind of like any sort of realizations that you think might be helpful for our listeners.
Yeah, well, I totally did not answer your question about how I've been adjusting to the pandemic, so I will answer that one. I realized it's tough. So a month before the pandemic shut everything down, I moved to another neighborhood. So I live in Fishtown now, which is fun and great. It has tons of takeout, except everything shut down a month later. And so what had kept me going with all these food allergies is when I finally accepted it. And I mean, it took months until I finally had like that last beer, which was probably April, and I was diagnosed in like November. So once I finally got to that point, and like you hit the like acceptance stage, and so then it became about like relationships. I either email places ahead of time if I'm traveling. Like I like to go out of town. I travel a lot for work, personal. I will scout the places that look like okay, I'm probably going to go here, and I will email them well in advance and try to find out what I can eat on their menu, because I've been that server at the table at a lunch rush or a dinner rush, and like you don't have 10 minutes to go to the kitchen and find out what's in everything. that said, if you run a restaurant, you should have a list of like your ingredients or allergy training for your servers. But like, I'm not going to assume that, especially if it's just like a takeout and there's like staff turnover, like who knows? So yeah, so I do like a lot of like if I'm traveling, I do a lot of emailing in advance and just like kind of getting that good to go. And I've had really good luck with that. I'll also prioritize if I'm traveling, like going to a higher end place or a couple higher end places because they will do that work with me. They'll literally like hand me a menu, like here's everything you can get, order like what you want, have a night, like have a great night, and that's been amazing. But for like that everyday takeout spot, I had just lived in the same neighborhood for years. I knew
And
front of
knew
house staff. I knew
everyone. You
back of
knew,
house staff. And it was like they
yes,
knew
of
my allergies. They'd
course.
be like, "Oh my god, Christine, we changed this. It doesn't have soy in it anymore. You can have it." Or, "Oh, now we put beer in that sauce. You can't have it." Like that paid off in spades. And then I moved
Because
here
you
like,
lived
"Oh,
in
this is
West Philly for a long time,
oh my gosh,
right?
forever, forever." And I worked in West Philly, like I was, embedded. And so I was like, "Oh, fun! I'll move to a new neighborhood and get to try new spots." Oh, nope, the world shut down. I don't know any of them. They're slammed. They're spiraling. They're trying to figure out PPP. I mean, it was just a nightmare. So really, like, I found
They
like
were a little less concerned about your food allergies and more of like where they're going to get their next paycheck for sure.
yeah, and also like a little bit of martyr syndrome of being like, I don't want to bother them. Like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't want to bother. I know that they're dealing with like a million people dealing with their crap. So as things have gone on, what I've done is like pick. I still, to be honest, I've been really bad about it. I really don't order takeout. Just like you, I've been like getting the takeout drinks from places I can go to. I order from like the same place here, and I'm not going to name them, but I called and was like, hey, I wanted to know if I could have like this bread product. Does it have barley in it? And I didn't call it a busy time the whole nine. And they were like, well, that label's like in the basement. I was like, okay. And they're like, we're just not going to like find the answer out for you. And I was like,
Are they able to
okay.
share the brand of who they use? Because I know.
I'll email them, like I'm not going to give up on them, but like that, that's a classic example of things that like happens. People are like, I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah. Which is why, I
Yeah.
mean, the emailing in advance and like whenever someone is able to get back to that, it's, it sucks for everyone. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I am cooking. I finally got better at cooking, which is like definitely an upside to this pandemic because I really need to get better at cooking. But it is, geez, I can cook like a lot. It's too much. But like takeout wise too, I think that like menus change. And so if you have food restrictions, just because like a month ago you were able to get that burrito doesn't mean this month you can't, right? Restaurants are all doing their best right now with suppliers and what they're doing. So you still have to check, like it's still on you to check. And without the face to face, like leaning over the bar, being like, hey, look, like I have this
Being able to
allergy.
have that conversation with the server or your bartender and, oh, let me go check with chef. Yeah, no
Yeah.
problem. But,
It's just not the same when it's like, hey, Grubhub or whatever. Like, don't
and
kill
it's,
me.
and I can't blame restaurants as well. Like plenty of times when we've been ordering on the weekends that they'll turn off the ability to make modifications on certain items. And I get it, I think they're still completely slammed on the weekends, which is great. So it's just kind of like being smart and thinking ahead and, constantly having the fight with my husband of, okay, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? And I honestly, it's, and talking about the cooking, that I somehow kind of worked myself into this anxiety spiral about food prep because of the pandemic. That, being able to have taken advantage forever about, okay, I'm just going to run out and get this and not even having to necessarily meal plan because, oh, I can order this or I can swing by here. I can, I'm always out and about, so I can grab this on my way home. And, thinking about it for weeks in advance. And it got infinitely worse when we would travel because we would go to these remote locations where the idea was to just be in nature and not go anywhere. But specifically when we went to Maine, we were going to be gone for 2.5 weeks. And so to pack, I put way too much pressure on myself. And once I named that and said that out loud, and is like, I need to chill on this. I need to come up with a better system because this is not healthy. This is not, because I have to be so cognizant of like what's going to make me feel terrible and what's not. So, so this is,
that.
This is something that I've learned, that if there's something that's kind of causing you anxiety, you got to name it, and you got to put a face to it, and you got to put it out there, and okay, how am I going to deal with this? Like, let's move on.
Yeah, I basically when I travel, I'll like I joke, but like my car is like a deli on wheels. Like there's a cooler with pogo. It's like I love to travel. I'll road trip myself. I drove myself from like LA to Albuquerque, and like yeah, I had a cooler. Like it's like a little deli back there, like all sorts of snacks and everything. Because I cannot like I'm a
Why
person who
wasn't I
walks into
doing that when
Wawa.
I was on the road? You should have
Yeah.
told, let's get in a time machine to 2011 so I can have healthier snacks and not be getting something at Wawa when I need something to eat in my car.
No, totally. And I joke, but like I'm the person that walks into Wawa and there's like, oh, here's the 5 things I can get in this entire place. And I live off of hard boiled eggs, pretzel bites that I can eat, and like the pickle bag. Like I'm just like, all right, I'm good. I've got like a vegetable, a protein, a carb, like I'm
It is
good
a
for a couple more
complete
hours.
meal.
But
Um,
yeah, I mean, something that like people can also be good about, like this is a tip for people who want to be like nicer to people with food allergies. Like let them bring their own food to things. I hate when people pressure me, like, let me cook for you, let me cook for you. Like that does not always work out. And I love you dearly, but I have paid the price for that. And it like they get a taste of my anxiety for once, which is nice. Like, yeah, you see how hard this is to read the label of everything you buy every time just in case the label changed? Man.
because
Um,
you don't have a designation. Like, I have to look for, dairy free, gluten free, what have you. You have to look at all the ingredients.
yeah, and it's a risk reward scenario. Spices, natural flavors, those could kill me at any given day, and they don't have to be labeled. So I just like, how much spices will I eat today? How much natural flavors can I eat today? It's a balance. Like, do I need this product enough to like, take that risk?
Roll those dice.
You know, live a little, but something that people can do is definitely like let you bring your own food. But also like I definitely think when we get back to hosting more for other people, like treat people with food allergies or food restrictions like with respect. Like it's still kind of maligned and like you're allowed to like joke about it. I mean, I know in the industry, as soon as it was like, oh, she's allergic to beer, there were people who literally acted like I didn't exist. So like you mentioned this, I think right at the beginning, almost like there are social like repercussions from having food allergies. People will treat you differently at a party. Like, oh, don't let Christine near that; she'll die. And it's like, would you be joking about me being like deaf? Like, would you? Like, I don't think you would. And it's not the same, but like, I could, yeah, I could die. So maybe don't talk about it unless you know I'm comfortable with it. Yeah, and people will be like weird. And I think also something people can do if they're watching this and they don't have food allergies, like when someone comes to you and tells you they have them or restrictions, don't be like, "Oh, I don't know what I would do if that happened to me," or "Oh, I would kill myself if that happened to me." Like the amount of time someone says that to me is like, "Do you? Well, okay, I'm
You're like,
living with it."
that's what I pay a therapist for. I'm working through it. So, which brings me back. Like, I
Oh
know
yeah,
that
yeah,
you wanted to highlight, the topic of mental health. So I really want to hear from you about your thoughts.
yeah. No, that's perfect because it's like I didn't go see a therapist when all that went down. My health coverage was spotty. I was on and off insurance, and I thought like I got really anxious once I got the food allergy, and then trying to live with having food allergies is it's so scary. It's terrifying. Like lots of people in your life just won't get it, won't accommodate you. I made my life about beer for 5 years. Like I quit my job in nonprofit at 25 because I was miserable and was like, okay, here's my path forward. I'm gonna become a beer rep. I'm gonna like work my butt off. And I got my dream job, and really it was like a nightmare. So now I was back at square one, and I'm in my 30s, and I'm like, oh my god, like what do I do? Like it felt like my world was ending, right? Like of course you're like 31, and like my world is over, and I thought once I got a handle on the food allergy stuff that my anxiety would go away. And it did. And it got like worse and worse. So even though things were managed, I was back working. I got hired at a Wharton school, which also I went back to working at Penn, which is my alma mater and a place I'd worked before in events. I went back to working there because I was worried about getting a job somewhere that I could be fired for being sick. And so I was like, okay,
Wow.
I'll work at a university because there's ample sick time and paid time off. You're far less likely to ever be fired. So that's just how it is. And there will be a place for me as someone who is like sick a lot, and that's what I did. Thank God, like I connected with a lot of the right people. I've found such like amazing colleagues through working there, I'm now on my third role there, just getting promoted, and like that is all new for me. I went through life like spiraling with anxiety, and as it turned out, not just undiagnosed food allergies, but undiagnosed ADHD and undiagnosed level 1 autism, or like mild or high functioning autism. And so you get to be in your 30s and you're given like more and more and more responsibility, and you would always been like an overachiever, and suddenly you are like a horrific underachiever with anxiety and like not, just spiraling. It really like, I finally got to a point with the anxiety where I was like, this is untenable. Like I've got the good job, I've got the food allergies under control, I've got the life, I've got
I should
friends,
be
like I've got,
fine. Yeah.
yeah.
Why am I not okay? I should be okay.
Yeah, I would wake up and in seconds my heart would be racing and I would be in a panic attack. And I was like, okay, something is very wrong. So I finally found a therapist. I found a neuropsychologist to do like try to diagnose me with anything or nothing. Just like throw the book at it, like what is going
Did it
on?
feel like the food allergy process a little bit all over again of like, I'm not ready to accept this or hear the results, but I know that I am coming in kicking and screaming, dragging my feet, but I know that things are bad and I need answers.
1,000%. It was like, I can't go on like this, even though I'm terrified of what will happen after this. Right. Yeah. And so even when, preliminary talks with the guy, we're kind of like, I think we're going in this direction. And then even though like there's definite family history on some of those things, and I was like,
Okay.
but no, right? Like that's not really going to happen. And then sure enough, like it felt like I got punched in the gut, and he was like, testing reveals that you have like level 1 autism spectrum disorder. He's like, I can officially or not officially diagnose you with that, depending on how comfortable you are, because it can have like ramifications. But he's like, I also like ADHD. Like you have ADHD. Like let's get you set up with somebody to help you like immediately, so that you
And are
can do
these
better
all
and function better.
what is so I'm very curious what the next steps are, because I know that I guess I'm not very familiar with like post-diagnosis, like what's
Mm-hmm.
next, is it strictly like cognitive, or is there medication involved, or is it just a whole bunch of yoga and meditation,
On any given day, it's like
herbs?
one of those things, right? Like nothing works all the time, which is so important. Like I'm just talking about my experience as one person who went through like one specific path. But that said, like the more like bigger takeaway for me was like getting that diagnosis, and this is less than 2 years ago now that all this happened. So I'm less than 2 years diagnosed, and people talk about like what's the point of the diagnosis, what's this and that, and like often, I mean, practitioners
To
can look at
have answers. To
well,
get the why.
I kid you not, I felt like I lost 20 pounds of stress. Like just I went from
Just
like
knowing.
big time. I mean, it was such a weight off my shoulders to be like, I can find things that actually work for me now that I know something about myself. Like naming it, like you said, right? Like it was named. And now the strategies that weren't working, you understand why they weren't working. And you can pivot and look at strategies that will work for how your brain actually
Sorry, we
works.
don't use the word pivot on my podcast.
Pivot!
You're on mute, Barb.
All right.
I'm just giving you a hard time. But
No, it's okay. I'm
but
going
you're
to
right.
circle back to that.
I'll still use that. I was using that before the pandemic, because that's
I know.
that's what we do.
Right there with you. No, but like, yeah. So, but it's still, oh my gosh. I mean, it took me forever. Took me forever to put myself first and get a therapist. It took me forever to like actually get to a point where I was like, I have to do things to work on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a mix. I have a therapist, so I do cognitive strategies with him. My physical health is important. So like I've been going on and off of like some injuries the past year, so I can't exercise as much, which has like a really bad effect on me. So like you said, like even yoga, like just finding ways to keep my body from like breaking again is really important, but it also helps ADHD. But even just like on a broader level, I started a medication, which went great until it didn't. And my medication, which was helping me like really hold it together last semester, I'm also in grad school. So I'm like, I'm working and going to grad school and ADHD and like all the things.
And it's a pandemic and
yeah. And it's just brutal. But the medicine all of a sudden wasn't, and it was causing severe depression, like deep,
Wow.
severe
Oh,
depression that I'd wake
jeez.
up the next morning off the medicine and be like, oh, all right, well, I feel normal again. That was bad. And I finally, through journaling, which like I can't recommend that enough. Like I don't aggressively journal. I've just got like a really super messy like bullet journal that's not pretty whatsoever. But just tracking like I took the med today or not. My mood was in the fucking gutter today or not. I was able to look back and be like, oh my God, every single bad day was a medicine day. Maybe
Huh.
it's time to try a new medicine or take it or not take any. So I just started a new medicine this week. We'll see. But ultimately, you need the cognitive skills. Whether you have a diagnosable illness or you just are having like deep anxiety because we live in a pandemic and it's been a nightmare, you've got to figure out what makes you anxious. And if you're not quite there yet, because that's harder to do without a professional, just knowing what you do when you're anxious. I spiral, I catastrophize. So I've got to find the ways to like, I don't have to drop out of grad school just because I'm having a bad day, right? But that's where my brain goes. So if you're the kind of person that does that, you've got to find the things or the people, whatever it is, that helps you stop doing that thing. Yeah.
Well, speaking of people, I know we miss hanging out with friends and being together, and so I wanted you to share with our audience your experience as a Quizzo host. I've attended a couple of your Quizzos. I don't think I ever. I don't think I ever got to go to any in person because I always had something else going on every time you would host one. Um, but I cannot wait until you do a Parks and Rec Quizzo because I have to do it.
It'll come
um,
again. It'll come again.
but I did participate with some of my girlfriends in the Gilmore Girls Quizzo where I would know a couple of the answers, but this group of girls, like I knew that they were going to take it. And so I just kind of sat back and watched on the Google chat of how they were like, they just immediately knew the answers. And a lot of the references I just didn't get, but I was super excited to be able to support you as well as it was also there for the hilarity of how intense people get about a particular television show. So, kind of the past, present, and future of Christine's Quizzo show.
Oh man, yeah, that's a good. Well, thank you for coming to that because, like, I mean, that's the thing. Like, my goal is to host a Quizzo where even the team that gets like 5 questions right still has fun and doesn't leave early. Like, if people are leaving early, like, I'm bummed, especially in person but even online, like people be like, we're gonna just not do the third round, right? So that my goal is to like not have that happen. And the Quizzos switching to online has been fun in weird ways for like it's almost like they've gotten nerdier. It's almost like the nerds of the nerds show up, and since they're all like a specific theme, like you said, like I just hosted one for Criminal Minds. Like I have free reign because I only host for something I know a lot about, or like my best friend, or like a helper, or someone can like co-write with me if I don't feel as knowledgeable on it. So usually I'm a mega fan of whatever I'm hosting, and I just can go nuts with like the jokes. And so I want to set it up to be a fun event with like clips or different things like that. We did some polls at one of my most recent ones. There was like in-event polling and just getting people talking. Like if I hear the groups talking and laughing at the open and close, like without me even doing any hosting, like I've killed it. And in the pandemic, it's been particularly like well responded to because people get to spend an hour connecting with strangers. Like that's something we're all missing. Like, I mean, I would kill to see you, and obviously I've driven to your house with like gluten-free donuts and
I
like
have loved
talk through
the
a window.
Christine pull up. Like, I'll get a text message an hour before, and
Yeah,
hey, are you home? I'm just gonna show up at your house, and can you just come up on my stoop and say hi? And I'm gonna force feed you gluten-free donuts.
yeah, that's like a
Okay,
big
that sounds
pandemic thing for
good.
me.
See you soon. I'll get the dog on a leash.
Right, but like you also miss like going to Fountain Porter where I'd meet you, and it's like, oh, we're talking to the person next to us that we've never met before, but we miss that. So these online quizzes have been a way to actually get strangers in a room together and interact, which for some people has just been so like rewarding. So I've been really grateful to World Cafe Live for being able to move those online.
And so your Quizzo, you're just gonna keep on doing it, however way, shape, or form you can.
I do, and speaking of mental health, I recently got like in the same week a bunch of offers and asked to do private quizzos for a school, company,
Oh
whatever.
yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Exciting, except when it's like not a good time, right? Like, and so
Yeah,
learning how
I got
I'm
some
sure,
stuff going on.
yeah, and I don't mean like, oh, it's a bad time, like the pandemic. I mean, like, literally, if it's like, if I've got three, my mom was having surgery and I had like two grad school assignments due, it's like, could I take this quiz? Could I work myself to the bone, stay up all night, and be frustrated and scared I'm not going to do a good job, and take this for the money, which arguably, like, I want, right, to pay for school. um, but that's something that's become really important. I started hosting Quizzo in 2010, actually, at the Blockley, RIP, at Penn.
Oh man, the Blockley. That was also called, oh, what was it called when I was an undergrad at Drexel? They opened
Oh,
my senior year at Drexel. Brownies? I think it
oh,
was
that
called
was one of the, yeah,
Brownies.
that was a brownies at one
It
point.
was a
Yeah,
Brownies in 2004, and that was our Thursday night spot. That is it was as college gets.
yeah. I was a fan of
Oh,
the Chili's next door.
it's I mean I hear
Um,
it's like no place else.
oh god, so good. But like, yeah, so for 10 years, right, I went from like a starving mentality of like take every job, work yourself to bone, to like, okay, well, I have a job. This is the bonus job. Learning when to say yes and when to say no, like not even just in a protect my brand kind of way. None of these things would have hurt my brand, but they would have hurt my mental health.
That's
And I
self-care. That
can
is
adjust to
prioritizing
not getting,
you. Yes.
yeah. And it's hard. Like, it's hard not to feel like selfish or weird or wrong. And I was like, of course, like I've got plenty of dates not this week, right? And also last minute requests, right? Like how much do you have to honor last minute request, right? But it's something you have to think about. Like you take on new clients all the time. You're a one woman show at your job. Like you can't take all the work, and you've got to figure out how to express that to people.
It's yeah, I think I learned pretty well a couple of years ago of like how to say no, and it maybe that coincided with everything I went through and starting to see a therapist, and like I don't think that was necessarily something I talked about with her, but maybe that was just something that was evolving. I who knows, but
I
I'm an
really
only
like what you
child.
said
I'm an only
earlier
child. I do what
about,
I want.
I just, I mean, you talked about like we go to therapy because people who don't, like the generation before us, it was work all the time, say yes, like don't go to therapy, and so I'm learning that, like, yes, again, like, did my dad have three kids, a full-time job, and a part-time job, I think, and go to grad school all at the same time? Yes. Is that healthy? Maybe not. And so, like, here I am, and I'm going to try to not just do that because somebody else did and pulled it off, right? It also meant that my
Absolutely.
mom like did an insane amount of work, and so it was, it's like it's not a one-to-one thing. Just because like one person did it doesn't mean you can or should do it.
I
That's
think
really
it's
important.
we always try to tell ourselves like don't compare yourself to other people, but it is so hard. And so I saw this quote that I've shared a couple times on Instagram. But a flower never compares itself to another flower, it just blooms. And so I try to remind myself of that it's everybody's got their own story, their own struggles, their own successes, and so all we can really do is be empathetic to one another, and remember that somebody might be having an absolutely terrible day and they're just trying to hold it together. So um awesome. Well,
So true.
thank you for really opening up and sharing a lot of that with us. I really appreciate it. So
I do
the
want to
last
shout out the people
oh yeah,
before
go
me
ahead.
who did that. Sorry, just know honestly that like I continue to kind of be open and upfront, like the way you said, like I'll talk to anyone about FODMAPs because I want them to be able to know and have that learning. Like it took so many other like strong people I know modeling openness and vulnerability and things that like I learned from them, and so I choose to kind of like be open about it, to the extent that I'm comfortable. Um, for that reason, and so it's I'm really grateful to people who also the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend of all things. I watched that.
Yes, that was
I was like,
great.
okay,
That
you
was
know what?
great.
Like, yes, Rachel Bloom. Like, I
Yes.
will go to a therapist. Thank you for
I
putting this out there.
took her a while to get there, but I was very entertained by that show for sure.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
the last question that I'm going to ask you today is your favorite venue. Tell me about, and it could be anywhere in the world. I know how much you love New Orleans, but whether it just brings back fond memories, or if the pandemic were over, that's where you'd be right now. Just what is a venue that you absolutely adore?
Ooh, okay, good question. Well, I would kill to go back to World Cafe Live right now. I work at the Wharton School for McNulty, or for Wharton Leadership Ventures, and like my office is on Walnut Street, and I used to leave all the time and walk past World Cafe, and I could just go to shows. They have like a million different types of shows, and I could just go to a show all the time. And over the years, I've been hosting there for over 4 years now. Like, just the relationships they've developed, the people who work there, like I just care about that place, and I am so glad they're still going. So, like as soon as I can go there, I will be going to Raw Cafe Live for sure, even if I'm not like hosting a Quizzo. And then yeah, I always say if it's cheating a little, tied with that is just like the entire city of New Orleans, right? Like, there's a million music venues. Like, I can't pick one. Like, also just walking around, there just is music, and so like as a venue, I am fussed in to go back to New Orleans
You
for the
could drop
22nd
me off
time.
at Bacchanal anytime. I just loved everything about that place. I know Bob and I definitely would love to go back, just the two of us, because when we went, we traveled with a group of 12
Yeah,
friends. So it is a very
yeah.
different experience when you go with a large group versus when we can go to some of the nicer establishments. But
Oh, I love
I,
Helen Gillette. She plays at Bacchanal, and I always go see Aurora Nealon and Tom McDermott play their like duo at Buffa's. Like, that's a must do when you go. So I definitely shout them out.
well, I've been building up those Southwest points. So as soon as I get vaccinated, we're going to start planning our trip. So, well, Christine, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. I absolutely loved our conversation. Will you please let our listeners know either how they can follow you or where they can get updates about your Quizzos?
Oh yeah. To learn about Quizos, the best case is to sign up for the World Cafe Live newsletter. So I don't do like self promote. I'm just sort of like an in-house, themed trivia host for them. So follow World Cafe on all their socials and definitely their newsletters, because they'll spotlight upcoming new events. And then beyond that, I do like, if you can tolerate a million posts of my dog in between Quizzo announcements, my Instagram handle is ChrisFish215. So yeah, so like Chris FISH215. Yeah, it's mostly dogs, but there's also Quizzo content and the
Who
like.
doesn't love dogs? Well, listeners,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure you follow Beyond the Venue podcast on Instagram and also subscribe on all your favorite streaming platforms. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mary Grace.